Welcome to the section week unit on Socrates and the Apology. What you'll need for this particular session is the copy of the Apology in Canvas. So let me open that up. There's an outline in the file section called Outline About I'll give you the exact name, sorry. It's called Outline for Plato on Socrates. So you'll need that. And so outline the text, and then it would be really, really helpful if you read, because I'll draw from it, the text that you should be looking at now on overview, which gives you some background information. I will not provide as much detail in today's lecture on the apology as I have in other sections, and my reason for that is this particular reading is the exam topic. That is, you are to make a case for or against the prosecution, guilt or innocence, not guilt, and sentence, sorry, spoiler alert, death sentence, for Socrates, as read in the Apology. Now, because it's the exam topic, I'm not going to stop, as I might in the other sections that we covered in the class, to talk about exactly how particular theories should or could apply to make the case in your view, or your group's view, that Socrates is in fact guilty or innocent, not guilty, and deserves or doesn't deserve the death penalty. The reason I'm not going to do that is that's the exam topic, so you need to sort of figure that out. But I will go through the sections of the Apology that are relevant for that analysis, and that to do so you'll need or could use the outline provided. So let me open up the PDF, because we might have cause for using that, of the Plato's translation into English of the Apology. First thing to say about it is it's not apologetic, right? That's not what this means. The translation you have here is in the public domain, as you can see here. I met Cathal Woods, I'm not sure, at a conference several years ago, and he was a scholar of Greek philosophy and translator with his students, and he mentioned he had this cool translation, which is available in tons of places online. You don't have to use this one, but it's free and it's fairly modern, 2007, and I think it's pretty fluid, so I like it. So we'll refer to that now and then. So without any further ado, I'm hoping you've read the overview here. This is probably the most famous, top three famous show trials, political trials in all of history, arguably the trial of Jesus as well. Socrates, is the famous instructor, and I won't say teacher, we'll say more about that in a minute, of the young men of Athens, Plato most famously, and of course Plato famously was influential on Aristotle. I'm not going to be very historical here. If you're really interested in that, there's a link here in overview in the third section by a Stanford scholar that digs deep into the history. This is not a history class. Don't pretend to be a historian. I'm just going to assume, for the sake of argument, that everything we hear Plato tell us actually happened. There's lots of probably good historical reasons to not believe that. If Plato is telling the story of the prosecution and death sentence of his famous teacher, he probably didn't tell it exactly the way it is. I'm not going to get into that. Let's just pretend that it's true. So we want to identify the charges brought against Socrates, what the charges mean, and look at Socrates' defense of his own position, his own case. And in the back of your mind, you might be thinking, what would John Stuart Mill and On Liberty think about this? Or in utilitarianism, what would an Aristotelian virtue theorist think? Christine Newlieb in the shorter article we read too. What would a Kantian think about this? Could what's being done to Socrates be universalized consistently? Or does what's done to Socrates amount to utilizing him as a mere tool for somebody else's ends? So, I mean, those questions sort of run in the background that might help you understand the text. So I'm going to bring you right to the charges. Maybe I should use the outline instead of the overview here. Oh, you know what? I skipped a section. My bad. Here on the outline, under Introduction A1 and 2, I want to say a couple of things, and then maybe we'll jump into the text itself. Section B of my outline gives you line numbers, and these should be standard, I think, since the 19th century, regardless of the translation you're using. And I have a definition of irony on the bottom of the page here on the outline, which is going to matter in just a second. So personally, Socrates, for many, many people I've known in the 25 plus years I've taught at different colleges, he is the reason they got into philosophy, right? They maybe didn't read him in high school, or maybe a little bit in high school, maybe in a religion class or history class or a politics class. Took a college class, started reading the way Socrates asked questions, and then people answer, and then he asked questions, and realized, wow, there's this whole method, and this is the Socratic method of asking questions and getting answers that really appeal to them. And certainly it was the case for me. So if you've ever heard someone say using the Socratic method, I mean, famously it's used in law schools, this is the source, right? You're reading it. True story, a little after 9/11, I was teaching a version of this class, and I had two students who were flying out of Austin. One was Austin, Houston to Vancouver. One was Austin, Houston, I want to say New York, I can't remember. And they were carrying a paper version, which I used to assign, of this very text. And they were stopped by TSA, that's the security people, the federal government security, and said this book was on a list. And they said, what do you mean it's on a list? And they said, well, it's on a list of books you're not allowed to bring on a plane. Now, I wouldn't have believed it if one of them told me, and it seems far-fetched, but since two told the same story, and they were headed in separate directions, I bought it. And then I realized, and maybe you will by the end of today's lecture and reading and thinking about it, what's so dangerous about this book, right? That even now, people think it's kind of edgy or risky or worth confiscating. And if you think about Socrates' case, asking questions to powerful people, questions they don't like answering, and maybe having them come up short with answers, something that nobody likes to do, least of all people in positions of power. And certainly the people prosecuting Socrates, Meletus, famously would have had some stature. The men of Athens who would have sat on the jury, who would have been citizens of note, served in the military, served in government, would have been people of means. Now, just as a side note, and I said I wasn't going to be a historian, but I'll say this much. The ancient Greeks were not good about having women and any foreigners, which was what they would have called them, people from other countries, people of color, any kind of not landed person, right, didn't have wealth, those people wouldn't have counted very much. And I'm not defending the way they treated them, but when you hear the jury talk, you should probably think people of means, men, but I'm hoping the argument Socrates makes extends across people, because Socrates famously will be a defender of reason, maybe not exactly the way Aristotle uses it or Kant, but close enough in some ways. So I'm hoping the arguments you hear in Socrates will make sense to everybody, regardless of your gender, orientation, ethnicity, gender identity, nationality, you name it. As far as terminology goes, this is A2 on the outline here. If you have a translation where Socrates does this Q&A, he says, let me talk in my usual manner. That's all that means, is asking questions, getting an answer, and then asking another question. If you notice there are a lot of if-then sentences, that's because Socrates will say, if this is true, then does this follow? That doesn't mean he believes the if part. He's doing a logical chain of reasoning. If X is true, then Y happens or doesn't happen. You might want to take note here of the kind of wisdom Socrates claims he has and doesn't have. That's lines 21D and E and 29B. A word about irony, and I've given you a couple of references to this. So Socrates is famous for, as lots of philosophers and others have written, be ironic. And if you look in a dictionary, which I've cut and pasted from Google here, on the bottom of your sheet, one definition called Socratic irony is a pretense of ignorance and a willingness to learn from another assumed, my emphasis, in order to make the other's false conceptions conspicuous by adroit questioning. In other words, pretending he's ignorant to learn from others, assuming that status. So sometimes you have to be careful. Is Socrates really saying he's ignorant? Is he pretending to be ignorant? And it's hard to tell, so you might need to make a case for which one you think is happening. In order to, by questioning, by expert questioning or adroit questioning, point out the false conceptions in another's view. So if you find yourself reacting different ways to Socrates, sometimes you think he's funny, sometimes you think he's serious, sometimes you can't tell, sometimes you think he's pretending to be ignorant when he isn't, you might think he's playing three-dimensional chess, where he knows the answers you're going to give and the answers to that, like a really good defense lawyer or prosecutor. Chances are a lot of that's going on. And I forgot my plug. Okay. My computer's about to die. All right, I'll just keep talking through the outline. Sorry about the motion here. To go find my plug. So I guess when you're reading him, I guess the caution here is to be very, very careful to say, I think he's being literal because, I don't know why I didn't do this in advance, but I thought I had my plug. If he's not being literal, is he being funny, sarcastic, mocking? I mean, that could be the case as well. We're going to see Socrates later in the, pardon my motion here, later in the dialogue. Oh, there's my plug. Suggest once they're discussing a punishment, Socrates is going to suggest not that he be punished for real, but that he actually be given free food in a public space so everyone can see. Now, I don't know about your picture of punishment, but in mine, getting free food so everyone can see after you've done something allegedly wrong or illegal would not be a punishment. So in that case, it's hard to take Socrates literally as like, really, I think I deserve free food, because he's got to know that politically that doesn't seem likely. He's just been convicted. Maybe in that case, what you want to say is, maybe he's being sarcastic to make a bigger point. Excuse me here when I find my plug. Oh, this is so unprofessional, but what are you going to do? Forgot to plug it in. So you might want to say in each instance where you think Socrates is saying something, identify what, by context, in light of the larger sweep of the, here's my plug, of the dialogue. Is he being literal? Is he being ironic, pretending to be ignorant, right, just to make a point? Is he being sarcastic? Is he being mocking? He might do more than one of these things at once. So in your exam, among other things, you might want to provide some context for why you think Socrates is doing something and why you think he's being sarcastic or funny or literal, or maybe a combination of those things. Okay, so let's get into the charges themselves. You see I've given here on B1 several places where the charges are listed. The one that you want to focus on the exam is the corruption of the youth. We don't get a definition of that in the corruption of the youth. So it's not really clear. If you want to dig in historically, I gave you that Stanford article, Stanford professor, you can read that. But it clearly must mean make bad in some way, right? To corrupt something is to make it worse than it otherwise is. So there are other charges, and you can look at the line numbers there. He's charged, Socrates, with being an atheist, making the better argument the worse, right? Which is a bit of a Ledgerman kind of thing. And again, even though those lines give you the different charges, it's the corruption of the youth that you want to focus on. So I'm going to go over now. Of course, he denies the charges, and I've given you the line numbers for that. And you might think his defense is a little odd, because his first defense, and I'm here in the overview here, he calls the brother of a dead man to say that the gods, through a holy person, the Delphic oracle, said he's the wisest. Now, the reason I say that's odd is because if you were going to give evidence in a court of law in the United States anyway, and you said, well, I don't have a witness about what happened, but I have a brother of a witness about what happened, and the brother is here, but the brother witnessed it for his brother who's dead. Oh, I'm sorry, let me get this straight. I've got the brother who heard from his other brother, the witness who's dead, that the Delphic oracle, which would have been a priestess, and I think historically there's some evidence that she stood over this sort of volcanic or earthen kind of gaseous eruption that would have given her visions that she would have spoken of in puzzles or less than complete sentences, so she could sort of see the future. And so the Delphic oracle would have said to a guy who, before he died, told his brother, and the brother told Socrates, you're the wisest person. So the way the story goes here in the Apology, Socrates doesn't buy it, and so he goes around and he questions everybody, the politicians and the poets and the craftsmen, and they all seem not to know very much, right? Or at least not know things, and they think they do. So famously, Socrates says, and this is Socratic ignorance, you might think it's literal, you might think it's sarcastic, you might think it's mocking, probably a little literal anyway. Socrates says that he admits when he doesn't know something, whereas others, when they don't know something, don't admit it. So I'm going to pause here for a second and say, is that a kind of wisdom, right? Perhaps, you might say to yourself, hey, when I'm ignorant, I don't know the depths of my major or a lot about my hobbies or politics or anything, I'm not going to pretend to know it, right? well, it's pretentious, right? And it puts on airs and it does it in a way that's not justified. If I'm ignorant, I'm just going to say it. Now, of course, that is a kind of wisdom, admitting your lack of knowledge. Does that make him wise? I mean, try this as an exercise in one of your classes. Say you're a comm major. Say, I don't know public speaking. Or say you're a chemistry major. I'm really not sure about the periodic table of elements, right? Or say you're in physics and you're like, yeah, I know there's an F equals ma, forces mass times acceleration, but I don't really know how that works. Or English, yeah, poetry and rhyming, you know. So it might seem odd that you would say you're ignorant, or at least your wisdom comes in admitting what you don't know. But if you think about the context, there might be some sense to this. After all, what Socrates is trying to do is defend himself against corrupting the youth. Again, we don't have a definition for that. Means making the youth somehow worse, because Socrates would have walked all over Athens, and the young people, men, would have followed him and been subject to his questioning, just like in the Apology. And they must have liked it because they kept following him to do it. And so maybe if he's supposed to be influencing them in a bad way, corrupting them, and his reply, I say maybe, is, I admit when I don't know things. Maybe if you're sitting in the jury, you're thinking, and there would have been hundreds of men listening to this, deciding guilt or innocence and then punishment. Maybe you're thinking, gosh, he doesn't really know very much. I mean, he has lots of questions, but he admits he doesn't know stuff. How can someone like that corrupt the youth? Someone let that question hang in there. One of the defenses he gives, I want to make sure I'm following the outline here, is the Delphic Oracle. Now, maybe I want to spend a second here. You see that's lines 21a to 22e. If I came to you here, let's just pretend it happened here, and I'm looking in my backyard, it's 3 p.m, and the skies opened up, and this sort of light shined, and it said, I am who am, right? I'm Catholic, so I get the reference. And I thought, oh gosh, it's, the omnipotent God talking to me. And God said, you are the wisest person on earth because there's stuff you admit you don't know. And then the clouds went back together. And then I said to you, you don't believe me about that, but I have a witness, my neighbor. And actually my neighbor died, and then he told another neighbor. So I'll bring that other neighbor over here. I'm sure the thing you would say is, you're off your rocker, right? You're nuts. Why should I believe the divine talked to you, or that you were inspired by the divine? Maybe you were stoned, like we think the Delphic Oracle was inhaling certain fumes from the earth. So it is kind of weird that Socrates would use the Delphic Oracle as part of his argument that he's the wisest. You might say in context, if these are the Greeks of ancient Greece and they had the stories of Zeus and Hera and Ulysses and all of that, maybe they would buy a story about the oracle who's actually speaking some sort of divine truth. On the other hand, for Socrates to make this argument, you think, well, he admits when he doesn't know. Is he really sure about like what he heard or what the witness said? And so, golly, should we buy this because we all have a religion that kind of buys into this? But then why would Socrates buy into a religion without asking questions? And in fact, what's odd here is that's the first thing he does. So if he's really giving you the Delphic Oracle as something that's true, or lends credence through the witness who's dead, the brother who died, and told it to his brother, and then we had the Delphic story about Socrates being the wisest because the oracle said it. Socrates really believes that. Why the heck would he go around questioning it? Unless that's being ironic or funny or mocking, you can see where this goes. Every time you think you've got a bead, a line, a read on what Socrates is doing, you have to sort of ask yourself what the context is, what's his motivation. I know he sounds like an actor here, but what's going on, right? And so you have to make a case about how you think what's going on here. So anyway, another Socratic defense, now we're ready to move on, to the horse analogy is lines 25b to c. And if you've read this section, and I'll be in the overview here too, Socrates defends himself by comparing himself to a horse trainer who does a good job, and the people of Athens, men, as those who would train horses and make them worse. Now, what's the relevant similarity going on here? Remember from our PowerPoint from early in the semester, analogies work when they pick out a relevant similarity. So what's the relevant similarity? You can draw it on a piece of paper if you want. Between the youth and horses, when it comes to training, and between trainers of horses, who hopefully make them better if they're good trainers, and bad trainers of the young. This is kind of a weird analogy. So you might go like this. Well, when I teach this in class, I don't know a lot about horses, but I always have somebody, right, Texas or somewhere, that knows how to train horses. And what they say is to train a horse, especially a young one, takes lots of time, takes lots of effort. Excuse me. I gotta answer a text. I'm sorry to do this right in the middle. That's my partner out with our kid who's at the park, and I don't want them to interrupt too badly later. Okay, so horses. People I know have trained them in class, not me, say you need experience, knowledge, patience. You need to reward a horse with food when he or she has done well. In other words, not everybody could do it. And if I did it, no experience with horses, I'd probably mess the horse up. So if you think about it, this analogy might be working like this. Socrates is playing, and maybe ancient Greeks know all about training animals, to the Athenian jury, and saying, look, implicitly, indirectly, he doesn't use these words. You know what it takes to train a horse. What my former students have said: experience, knowledge, patience, rewards, right? And only a few people here can really do that well. I mean, who's got the experience, knowledge, training, knows about rewards? Everyone else is going to mess up a horse. So let's assume most people don't know how to train a horse. They're going to mess up a horse. We don't want them around horses. Some people are going to have experience, knowledge, training. They're going to make a horse better. In other words, train it to do things. If you think about it, what's the relevant similarity with young people? Whether it's the men of Athens, you can think much younger. Right? I've got a 16-year-old and a 2-year-old, or much older. You might think, well, not everyone knows how to train people, right? Young or especially. Takes knowledge, experience, training, maybe has something to do with rewards. If here it looks like Socrates is saying, not everyone can train the young, train, help them learn, help them grow, ask good questions. It's unlikely all of you have that ability. Maybe it's likely just one person has it, me, like the horse trainer for the horses. It may be indirectly what Socrates is saying is if you think most people will mess up a horse, because not most people can be good horse trainers, most people are going to mess up the young. Who is most people? It's got to be the jury, because that's more people, right? This cross-section of men and athletes anyway. So how does this show he doesn't corrupt the youth? He's pointing the finger at the jury, at least some of them. Now you have to ask, is he being serious about this analogy? Because if he is, he's just accused the jury, who's got him in the box here, prosecutor's box. He's just accused the jury of corrupting. So he's basically pointed the finger at all of them using a logical analogy. And how would you feel about that if you're on the jury? You might be defensive and push back and be like, you're the corrupter, right? I don't care about your analogy. You just said it was me. Or you might go, yeah, maybe I don't have the experience. Gee, why are we prosecuting Socrates? I mean, he seems to know his way around questions and answers and admits when he doesn't know something. There are a lot of people up here that think he corrupted, but they don't know how to train young people. So that's the kind of analogy I think that's going on here. Again, you might want to be running in the back of your head. Could Mill help out Socrates here? Could Kant help out Socrates here? Could virtue theorists help out Socrates here? And you're going to need to dig into those theories to see if you agree that Socrates is the better trainer, right, of young people, or if in fact the jury is the worst trainer and therefore more likely to corrupt the young. There's also an argument here at lines 26C and 26C to 28A, right in the middle, that Socrates is not an atheist. Now, remember, one of the charges is that he's an atheist, and the way the argument runs on these lines, Socrates never says, I believe in God. Not here, right? What he says is, if I believe in flute players, right, then flutes. If I believe in this, then that. And if I believe in divine things, or the divine sons and daughters of gods, then I must believe in the gods. And that doesn't say he believes in the gods. It says if I believe in the divine creatures, children of gods, then I believe in gods. So there's an if-then argument here. And since he's being accused of believing in the wrong kinds of divine things, that was one of the charges, he must believe in divine things. And if he believes in divine things, he believes in divine. Notice again, not saying he believes in God. So he can't be an atheist using the very charges Meletus throws at him as part of the argument, or the sort of first steps in the argument, right? Leave that out there. What do you think? Good argument that he's not corrupting? or rather, good argument that he's not an atheist or not. There's also this long argument. I may have to get into the text of this. This is lines 33a, b, and c. That, let me see. Let me get the text up. He's not a teacher, and this is worth some emphasis. If I can find the text, which I'm going to have to go all the way back. So how does that argument work? Well, 33. Let me see if I get the line right. Teacher argument. I want to really hit this. This is one you want to talk about in your final 33a. Okay. I'm going to scroll through. Open. I had this open already, didn't I? Yep. Okay, so let's go down. And there's some historical background you need to understand this, just a little. Let's see. Here we go. 33a. I've never been anyone's teacher. If anyone listened, I never rejected them. So 2. 3, I don't converse if I receive money. Okay. And refuse if I don't. 4, I allow rich and poor to question me. Right? No pay. Right? So you might say, well, what's this all about? Well, the period that Socrates was talking about would have had these roaming teachers called sophists. You heard the word sophistry, which is to convince people of something that's not true by clever use of words. So he's saying, and they took money. So partly he's saying, I'm not one of them. But let's be ahistorical for a minute. Let's just try to figure out, at least a little bit, the logic of the argument here. He's saying, I'm not a teacher. So don't say I'm a teacher. And by the way, be careful in your exam. You don't want to say he says he's a teacher, because he says right here, I'm not. Well, why is he not a teacher? Here's some non-teacher characteristics, right? If anyone listened, I never rejected them. So I'm not a teacher because I never rejected anybody, right? That might suggest I'm not a teacher because I never rejected anybody. Teachers reject people. That's mildly true, right? Some classes reject some people for all sorts of reasons. Some teachers reject people for all sorts of reasons. But then I know a lot of teachers that don't reject people either. Anyone come to my class, sit in on it, right? Whether you're paying tuition or not, you're curious about it. So maybe that's not such a great characteristic or necessary characteristic for being a teacher. Next one, I've not been a teacher, nor do I converse if I receive money, and refuse to talk if I don't. So I'm not collecting a fee. So not a teacher because I'm not collecting a fee. So let me ask you, do teachers collect fees? And of course the answer to that is in part yes, right? Because you're a St. Ed student, you're paying tuition, that's a fee. Have you had teachers that didn't collect a fee? And you might think, well, in the role of teacher, maybe not. Although I bet you some of you had some sort of teacher or coach or instructor, religious or not, that wasn't paid. And I'm also guessing that maybe your first teachers were your parents. Certainly that's the case for me. I don't know if you want to say they get paid. My dad's a retired banker. He used to say we get paid with psychic emotional income, which of course you can't spend. So if you can be a teacher without wearing the teacher hat, and that might be the kind of thing Socrates is worried about, because the sophists who taught bad arguments for money have in mind. If you can be a teacher and not get paid, then this doesn't seem like a good characteristic. So let's look at the next one. Any of them turn out good or not good, I'm not responsible. So not a teacher, they turn out good or not good, not on me. So I guess teachers are responsible if you turn out good or not good. I can see the argument for that. Like, if I've done my job, your other teachers, parents, coaches, religious instructors, if they've done their job well, stuff you've learned, you should be able to make good decisions. On the other hand, people make good or bad decisions independent about whether or not their teachers did a good or bad job. So why think when people do good or bad, well or poorly, outside the classroom, it's on the teacher? And maybe they weren't listening to the teacher that day, or maybe the teacher had a bad lesson, or maybe the students are doing what they want with what they learned, right? Last part here, I never promised any instruction. And if someone says that, they're not talking the truth. So let's talk the promise thing. Not a teacher because I never promised anything. Do teachers promise instruction? Well, yes. Our syllabus in this class has certain obligations, promises, deliverables in the world of business. So yeah, teachers promise stuff. On the other hand, they can't promise everything, right? I mean, students have to do work, and tutors have to do work and coaches have to do work, so it's not all on the teacher. So I guess I'm asking about this sort of teacher argument, and I'll go back to the outline in a minute. Let me go back down here and find it. Teacher, we did atheist. What's up with this? It seems like some of these criteria are good for being a teacher. Forget about the historical context here. Maybe this is just, logically. Some of them don't seem like they're so good for being a teacher. So is this a straightforward argument about, like, I'm not a teacher, so I can't corrupt because only a teacher can corrupt? But then he said toward the end there, I'm not a teacher because I'm not responsible for the stuff you do. Well, teachers aren't responsible for the stuff you do either, right? Not directly. So you need to ask about this teacher argument. Literal, serious, comical, mocking, ironic. Is he expecting us to fill in what we think teachers do? And at the end of that whole line of thinking, literal, sarcastic, mocking, ironic, if you're in the jury, are you going, can he be a corrupter if he didn't do all that stuff? I mean, if he's right about those 5 or 6 things about teachers or not teachers, can he really have made the young worse? And then in the back of your head, asking about the moral theories we've used, do we think this is a good argument, or do we think then it would, even if he's a teacher or not, like whatever, would it be right to convict him? And you can be Kant, Mill, or Aristotle on that count. In lines 36a to b, I'm now shifting gears here, Socrates makes some arguments about the punishment he should get. There is some odd stuff about this. One thing I mentioned earlier, looking for my cord. And let me see if this is on the outline too. I think it is. Yeah, this is before. Well, actually, the guilty verdict comes in at 35D and E. You can go look at the vote there. We have some historical reasons to think that's how it lined up. And like in the U.S. now, if you're convicted of a capital offense, there's a separate deliberation, separate jury in I think every case that has to decide the punishment. So the guilty verdict is 35D. Then they argue about the penalty. That's what we're doing now. So in arguing about the penalty, this is very odd. I think it's odd. He says, Socrates, he wants to be fed for free in the public square instead of being executed. He actually says that's what happens to the Olympic victors, right? They win in the competition in the Olympics, and so they give free food, and everybody claps, and they're honored for their, I don't want to say courageousness, but excellence in sport. Can he possibly mean this? I mean, they've just convicted him of corruption. Now the same jury's thinking, what are we going to do to punish him? And his answer is free food in public so everyone can see how great I am. He doesn't say that great I am part. I threw that in there. Another question to ask, serious, mocking, sarcastic, ironic, right? Like he's pretending not to know things, like not to know that they're going to think this is silly, that they should praise him in the public square to see what they're going to do next. Maybe he's curious about the punishment, and maybe this sort of lets him see what people think the punishment really should be. Anyway, there's something very odd here. Sometimes students say he clearly knows he's going to be convicted, so he says, I should be honored, because that's literally what he thinks should happen. Or maybe he's mocking the people that just convicted him. You can make what you want of that. He then says, and this is going to be the last part here, and I'm in the second to last paragraph of the overview, when handed the death sentence, and this is what they come down with, they say Socrates says death is one of 2 possible things, and this starts at 40b. Either it's a long sleep forever, or a chance at the afterlife to talk to the great poets. Now, how do you read this? Again, options: serious, literal, mocking, ironic. Let me suggest a couple of things here. I don't know what your view is on death. If he's hopeful, right? He doesn't say these are the only 2 options. Carefully says I'm hopeful. What would be great about a long sleep? Well, if you've ever had a really great night of sleep, I mean, just perfect in every way, it probably just rejuvenates you and you feel terrific and rested. Now imagine that going on forever. Now, problem with that is you got to wake up to know it's rejuvenating, right? You wake up after feeling refreshed and you don't need a coffee right away and you're good to go. But he's talking to the jury. So if the jury is looking at him and they've just sentenced him to death, and he says, I would sleep forever and feel great. What do you hear if you're on the jury? Do you hear, why would he feel great? We just sentenced him to death. Or would you hear, wow, he's going to sleep forever and have no worries and cares, and I got to deal with the aftermath of this decision? Do you hear, he's clearly mocking me. Wow, what chutzpah. On the other hand, maybe he's really not guilty. Too late. We just found him guilty. But he's not really concerned about this because he goes with a clean conscience. So many ways of reading, that. The second option, and this is, again, there may be more than two, but he says there's a hope there's two, is he's going to go to the afterlife, Hades, I think, in the Greek mythology, right? And talk to all the great poets and soldiers and do the exact same thing he just did. So to think about this for a second, so we just sentenced him to death for corrupting the young, making the young worse, and we're punishing him to death, right? And by the way, historically, in the other Socratic texts, he drinks hemlock and he dies, and he has this long speech after he drinks the hemlock, or at least a speech. We know, no, medically, hemlock is, you wouldn't check out that way, but that's neither here nor there. So, sentence him to death, he goes to Hades, he talks to all the great poets, all the great generals, and he does the same questioning. Is this mocking? It's just like, yeah, you just convicted me for corruption by asking questions and getting answers and probing deeper into questions. You just convicted me. You think it's a punishment. I'm going to do the same thing with people better than you. The great generals and the great poets. What is that? How does that sound if you're on the jury? Literal? Mocking? Ironic? Sarcastic? Proud? And you sort of need to make a case for that. Why he would do that at that point. So that's really where we're at. Let me go look at the outline one more time to make sure I've covered everything. I think I did. Yeah, I think I'm good here. So what you might do is read the dialogue with this in mind, all of the stuff I mentioned in today's lecture, and with the outline. I'm going to get out of my screens here. And ask yourself, what would the main figures think about this? And then just keep a little catalog. An Aristotelian might say this, a Kantian might say that, a Millian in On Liberty or in utilitarianism might say that. And that's kind of how to go about constructing the exam. And then the prompt is in Canvas, right, for all the different parts. So I'm going to stop here and post it, and I will, good luck on the exam, everybody, and maybe I see you in office hours, and thanks for taking the class. I know this is sort of a different way to take the class, but I hope it's suitable. I hope it fits what you want in terms of scheduling and doing it on your own time, and yet there's still some interaction, especially like in office hours or by email. And we'll see you soon.